Many of us are or have been English writing teachers. So think back to the day that you had training on how to give feedback on writing. Can't remember it? Neither can I, and yet it's mysterious that we're expected to do it based on no training whatsoever. I spoke to...
I usually tell people it's like hammer without an H, so Ahmar. Okay, it just helps standardize it. Okay, and Mahboob. Yeah.
To try and get to the bottom of how do we give feedback on writing on today's Masters of TESOL. Hello, I'm Andrew Bailey, and we'll be speaking to Ahmar Mahboob very shortly, but first, this. As regular listeners will know, I've put out a call for people to send in examples where they'd been asked unusual questions in the classroom, and here's one of the first responses.
Hi, this is Mike Griffin in Seoul at ELT Rants Reviews Reflection. It wasn't a question that was asked to me, but this was a memorable question I've heard asked in an English classroom. It was 2007, and I brought my brother and his then girlfriend, now wife, to my class and just gave students a chance to chat with them. And one adult student, quite a shy guy, nice guy, asked her, "How do you please your husband?" And she didn't quite know how to answer that, and she held back her giggles and asked him to clarify. And then he said, "How do you make him happy?" And that's when she lost it. And just by the way, he intended to ask, "How do you get along well? How do you stop fights?" And this sort of thing. Thanks for listening.
So this is a good example of English being a very euphemistic language, and therefore it's very easy for students to wander into some pretty saucy conversational topics without even knowing it. For example, the number of students I have here in Seoul that tell me they like to play with their girlfriend at the weekends.
Oh yeah.
So a big thanks to Mike for sending that cheeky story, and if you have a good one then please check the website and it'll give you instructions on how to send yours to me. Our guest today is Ahmar Mahboob, who teaches linguistics at the University of Sydney, Australia. He's published 8 books and over 60 research papers, and in this interview we talk about giving effective feedback to written English. We cover a lot of concepts very quickly in this interview, so in the notes I've put a link to the paper that Ahmar is referring to, and I really encourage you to check that out. It will really give you a much deeper understanding of what we're talking about. So we start with, why aren't teachers trained how to give effective feedback?
It's a gap in the teaching methodology literature. People talk about, if you look at a typical textbook, they will talk about each of these skills, the writing, reading, speaking, listening, but they don't actually talk about feedback as an explicit sort of a unit of looking at how to understand feedback and how to provide feedback effectively. It's a gap that there is and that needs to be addressed.
You said there is some debate as to how effective feedback even is, so where do you sit on that?
Well, there's a lot of debate about if feedback is effective or not. And it goes back to a long time. But one of the main issues for this debate is essentially the idea of input hypothesis and Krashen's work, and the idea of providing enough comprehensible input which minimizes the role of the teacher as a leader within the class and sees the teacher more as a facilitator. Therefore, feedback is not seen as something important. In fact, in terms of that model, feedback doesn't help students because it is the input and that helps. And so that, in a sense, creates a sense that feedback is not very useful, and that there's been a lot of research on, is feedback useful or not, where they've looked at the impact of feedback on students' language development. And you have people who think that there is, and there are people who think that there's not. My position is that feedback is useful if it is designed appropriately, and if it is given with thought and with care and with an understanding of how feedback works within the whole teaching learning cycle. So it's not just something that's independent of what you do in a classroom, but it's linked to what you're doing. And it's designed keeping in mind how language works and how student language development works and how different genres work, and then creating a genre for feedback itself.
Especially in a lot of Asian countries, that students expect in their written homework, they expect basically grammar feedback, and that's it. So how would you kind of introduce this more textual approach to feedback?
Yes, it's true that a lot of teachers typically give feedback on the lexicogrammar, but lexicogrammar is one aspect of language. And it's something that actually takes a much longer time for students to develop. So, you might as well be giving feedback on a student's use of article for 20 years and they will still not get it right. Because, the use of articles is very contextual. It's related to different types of Englishes and how people use it differently. Whereas other things, for example, the organizational pattern of a particular text type is pretty consistent. And it's consistent across a number of sort of fields in which a particular text type is used. Okay. So if you are to take, for example, procedural text, the idea of having your list of ingredients and the procedure is consistent whether you're using it in physics or chemistry or biology or even something like cooking, right? So the procedural texts typically are the same, work the same way, and it's something that the students just get because it makes sense to them. And once they get it, then you start working on other things. And that's where we look at the strata as a way of identifying what level the problem is at. So there are 3 strata that we looked at.
Okay, so the 3 strata are?
The whole text, the paragraph and the phases, and then the lexicogrammar.
Okay, so start very general and then get much more specific. Grammar is the last thing.
So it's not ignoring lexicogrammar, but considering that, thinking of it as something that's perhaps not the first thing that we focus on. And then within each strata, we're looking at the 3 meta functions, so ideational, interpersonal, and textual, and identifying all 3 of them as ways of looking at text and then providing feedback with that understanding.
How would you explain text?
So text type, the text type, you can think of a procedural text is a kind of a text type. It's structured in a certain way, and it, regardless of where it's used in which discipline, that structure doesn't really change. And the lexicogrammatical resources that are used in each stage of that text are consistent within that stage, but they shift across different stages. And then you might have another text type, for example, a recount, or you might have something which is like, let's say, a discussion. And a discussion has its own sets of stages, and then within each stage, there are specific lexicogrammatical resources that are used. And those descriptions are already available. Okay. So the teachers can use those descriptions to develop an understanding of what lexical resources are used in what stage of a text and how these texts work, and then use that to teach students and also use that knowledge to provide feedback.
A lot of writing teachers love doing peer feedback. What's your feelings about peer feedback?
Peer feedback doesn't really work because, to give feedback, you need to have an understanding of what it is you're giving feedback on. So if your own language is not very well developed, if you don't have a meta language, then how will you be able to provide that feedback? In fact, you can't really do it very well. It keeps, of course, the students busy. It's a good activity, perhaps, for developing a student's understanding of language. Okay. But to do it effectively, you need to then train the students to provide feedback. And perhaps what you might want to do is, instead of telling the students to give feedback on anything, you might train them on, help them focus on one aspect of language. Give them a lot of examples, maybe work with them on training them how to give feedback using joint construction, and then ask them to do it independently. So if you were to use pair work for this, you still should use the teaching learning cycle. Okay. Do the deconstruction. How is feedback given? What is, let's say, if you want them to focus on conjunctions, talk to them about conjunctions, talk to them about how feedback on conjunctions can be written, give them examples of good feedback on conjunctions so that the students know what they should be doing, then work with them on a sample text and help them and work together with them to develop feedback on conjunctions, and then ask them to do it. Okay. So that might work. But if you just ask them, here, give each other feedback, they wouldn't know. No, they don't know. So you have to build their expertise and understanding before you do it. And if you do it systematically, then yes, it can work. But often it doesn't, because it's not used that way.
Okay, so finally, if anybody listening is interested in learning more about this kind of feedback approach, are there any good resources online? Or?
Yes, there are quite a few resources now. DevoYDevrim at UNE has been working on it, and I've been working on it. We've worked on it together quite a bit. And I think if you go to his academia page, or you come to my academia page, you will find links to some of the articles that I refer to. And those articles are free to download.
Excellent.
And then, as I said also, that it's this, I think giving feedback and using this model is a very good sort of an action research project for teachers to work on. They can implement it stage by stage within their own context. They can see how it works, they can develop it more, and I would love to hear from them if they do it. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Sure, Andrew. Thanks.
So there you go, some really useful advice on how to give feedback on writing. But I really encourage you to read the paper that he's talking about. It's very, very useful and goes into much more depth than we had time to go into in this interview. So that's it. It's 2015. God, that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? It sounds too high. We should have stopped at about 2010, I think. But yeah, please subscribe, please send me stuff, send me contributions, stories about your own classrooms, give me star ratings on iTunes, please, and I'll see you next time. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Oh yeah. Do you like it?